Redditors who lived in secluded towns, what's the darkest thing that has ever happened in your town that everyone knew about but never talked about? In my hometown there was a girl who hid her pregnancy from everyone. She gave birth in her family home while everyone was out but hemorrhaged and fainted. Her dad found her and took her to hospital where they proceeded to ask him where the baby was. He didn't know she was pregnant but went back to the house to find the baby. He found the baby in a bucket in the cupboard. She had stabbed it multiple times with manicure scissors. She claimed it was dead on delivery, but the autopsy proved otherwise. She was arrested and spent a few months in a mental institution before being released back to my hometown. Somebody owned a pub and killed his wife and bricked her into the wall. She was reported missing. 30 years later they were renovating the pub and found her, but at that point her husband had died. About 9 years ago, a guy lost his job at a nearby Kaiser, so he killed his 5 children and wife and then turned the gun on himself. Before he shot himself, he faxed a letter to a news station explaining that the tough economic times we were living in left him no other choice, and also apparently indicated that he and his wife had agreed to this murder-suicide pact weeks before it happened. They had pulled their older children out of school and everything. A girl at my high school went missing. Then about 2 months later the paper ran a story about how a local girl was abducted, taken to Mexico and gang-raped, sodomized and several other graphic details. That girl showed up at school. She was there about 5 minutes before everyone connected the dots and she had to leave. It was sad as hell at the time. It's even sadder now that I am grown up and understand what happened. My small town paper is an a-hole. Girl in my neighborhood was tied to a tree, raped by multiple boys, and left there overnight, completely naked until one of the neighbors found her in the morning. No one talked about it. Nothing was ever done. One of the elementary school teachers was molesting kids. He went on a Wednesday night in March hunting trip with a bunch of the kids' dads. There was a terrible accident, and the teacher did not survive. The mandatory sheriff's investigation found no sign of foul play. Family up the road from me seemed like nice people, always friendly, owned a business within the area, everyone knew them. But they all seemed kind of off or strange. I don't want to use the term, but it was apparent they were all a variation of slow to a degree. One day news broke that the father had been sexually molesting his 2 daughters, I think 17 and 13, for God knows how long. Guy was never formally convicted due to lack of evidence, so he remains an outsider now to the town. I believe his kids were sent to CPS immediately. There was a similar story in my town. A man molested his 4 daughters as well as forcing them to watch him and their mom having sex. She knew all about it but said nothing. They all had a slight intellectual disability as well, ranging from the lower end of normal to an actual slight disability. Child services had been notified, but since they tell the family they're visiting beforehand, they always pretended everything was fine and nothing happened. It only got out when the youngest daughter, who was about 5 at the time, was at a friend's house and asked her and her mom if their first time hurt that much as well. I went to school with one of the older girls and she used to lie a lot and had to cover for her dad a lot as well. When she was about 12, she was out of school for a few days and had some weird cover story, but it later turned she was getting an abortion because her dad got her pregnant. Really effed up story. Not in my city but in my family. My great-uncle Norm was a Vietnam veteran and he brought home a sweet Vietnamese wife. They were very happy for some time. He taught her English and she was very crafty. They had 2 sons that he loved very much. When the sons got older, she became jealous of how much time he spent with them and how much he loved them. She became mean and resentful, spiteful. He started finding old meat and bugs in his lunches, and when he started bringing his own lunches, she would stalk him at work and try to give him lunches she made. She started ripping apart the house for him to come home and clean up, and didn't feed her sons even though she was the housewife. He filed for divorce, and when he left for work after handing her the papers she stabbed her sons to death, doused their bodies and herself in rubbing alcohol, and lit herself on fire. He was absolutely devastated. As a kid I wondered why he was such a zombie, and when I got older my father told me what happened to him. I would probably be an emotional husk too. A decently popular Chinese restaurant in town had one of the owner's babies walk out the back door and disappear. It was effing heartbreaking. The parents on TV and all in the paper. There was a big search effort. Eventually they found the baby's body stuffed into one of the cabinets at the restaurant. Pretty sure the place is still open. The mother had beaten the baby to death. I looked into it, she's serving 22 years, then being deported. The place is closed. Darn, I think I saw a news story about that or a similar story. The mom accidentally killed the daughter and told the dad to help cover it up, which he did. The town pastor was allegedly touching the altar children, both boys and girls. It was effed up because apparently some of the kids told their parents about it, but the parents either didn't believe them or didn't care enough to stop this from happening. So this went on for a while and less people went to church except for the hardcore devotees, which were usually the parents of the children. So until those kids grew up they were forced to be sexually abused by their parents and no adult did anything about it, and I believe the same pastor is still there to this day. You should report this. He would 100% be still abusing other kids. When I was a kid in the west of Ireland there was a guy in his 20s, who used to cycle past our school at the same time every morning. No, this isn't going the direction you think it's going. The story I was told was, that this young man as a teenager had been an only child living on a small isolated farm with his widowed mother. He was 18 and he was basically running the farm on his own. One day the guy snapped and beat his mother over the head with a blunt instrument and killed her. The people of the small village he lived in felt sorry for the boy. They thought he was a good kid. They felt that the mother had been an ogre who had made his life hell and what happened was very much out of character. So the murder was covered up on condition, the local priest stipulated, that the boy cycled about 15 miles every morning to a very well-known Marian shrine and said an act of contrition for what he had done. The mayor's daughter murdered her boyfriend and he covered it up. It was huge. I ended up moving out because it was just getting out of control. People started claiming the police chief knew about it, that the police weren't taking the matter seriously, that she had done this before, etc. It was insane. She ended up committing suicide and blamed it all on her father in the note, and he ended up serving the sentence after taking a guilty plea. It destroyed the community. Woman shot the guy that molested her son in the middle of the courtroom. Movie was made about it, even bumped into the woman at the store a few times. Have never heard anyone mention it other than the paper occasionally. Movie, A Time to Kill. Starring Samuel L. Jackson, Matthew McConaughey and Kevin Spacey. Definitely worth watching. So, this guy's girlfriend found out that he was going back to his home country to get married. She goes into a fit of rage and ends up murdering him, loads his body into a blender, cooks up a meal and serves it to construction workers and fed the remains to neighborhood dogs. Dead guy's brother is concerned, so visits girlfriend and finds a tooth in the blender and suspects a murder, thus alerting the police. She was arrested. There was a serial killer that came through town and killed a few people. One of the victims was laid out on the shore of the lake in front of their house after the guy had killed them. That plot of land has been basically cursed. Every time someone would go to buy it, the deal would either fall through or they'd start building and run out of money. Someone finally built a really nice house on the plot. Waiting to see if it lasts. Edit, it was the guy that killed Gianni Versace. My town is not very small, but was fairly small when these events happened. In the 70s, a man had been kidnapping young girls, about 10 years old, and keeping them in a dungeon made from an old bunker below his garage. One 12-year-old girl was kept in his dungeon and raped for 6 months. The man actually aided in the search for one missing girl, to try to mislead the police, although he was eventually caught when his wife grew suspicious. He was given life in prison. The first time I heard about this was from a YouTube video compiling similar cases. The video mentioned my town, and after a quick search I found out that the house was only about 300 meters from me, and I had passed it hundreds of times while walking to school. I get chills every time I think about it now. I suppose people don't mention it anymore because it happened 40 years ago, but my mom, who grew up only a little further up the street from this man, instantly knew what I was talking about when I asked her about it. My wife grew up very near Noble, GA, unincorporated, where the Tri-State Crematory event came to light in 2002. The incinerator broke and the operator apparently was just tossing bodies in the backyard, kind of junkyard, in cars, under lawn clippings, partly buried, in between trees, etc. The town found out, because multiple dogs brought home body parts. When I was in 4th grade, a woman in her mid-20s was murdered by her friend who apparently had had a crush on her. He was in a kinda popular local metal band. He strangled her to death in his apartment, cut her head off with a machete, undressed her except for her boots and posed the headless body in a pornographic way. He took multiple pictures in different poses, as well as a few close-up pictures of her head, and uploaded them to a gore website. When the moderators contacted him, he panicked, took down the post, set fire to his apartment, took her head and killed himself by driving into a truck at full speed. There was a small article about it in the local newspaper, but after a few days no one mentioned it anymore, I assume out of respect for the family. I only found out the true scope of what had happened when I became friends with the younger sister when I was in high school. Horrifically, to this day when you Google image search the deceased's name, the pictures that man posted are the very first things to turn up. They're spread across countless international gore websites, and the family can't do anything about it. Disclaimer: in case anyone wants to ask for the name, I won't post it here, nor will I DM it. If that means you don't believe it, okay, but her dignity is more important than that. When I lived in Kenya, the police found a politician that had been tied up, stabbed and shot multiple times before being hung, not necessarily in that order I guess. The newspaper had a quote from the police chief saying, "It's the worst case of suicide he had ever seen. Don't want to make any accusations, as not to end up being suicided yourself."